Alright, time for another book review, and today I'm going to be reviewing A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. Right off the bat, a fantastic book that I would indeed recommend to a friend. I think this is an incredible book for a number of reasons, chief among them being that it's a very diverse book in a sense, meaning that it does so much. In this book, you find action, you find mystery, you find political intrigue. Above all else, it's actually, even though Game of Thrones is obviously well known for like its violence and whatnot, and the gruesome character deaths, there's actually a bit of depth to it. There's tons of depth to it, and it says a lot about politics and offers plenty of wisdom along the way. So it's an incredibly bold book as well. And this is something that I give it tons of credit for, because with a lot of other series, you would find them shying away from certain issues or topics, or instead of revealing something more and using bold decision, using the fact that they're not shying away from any sort of thing, just all the gruesome little details, all the ugliness of the world. They would shy away from that in order to make a more mass appeal, something that is a little bit more friendly to the reader. But Game of Thrones kind of backs you up into this corner, and it kind of makes you uncomfortable at times, and it uses that to its advantage, because through showing the horrors of the life that they live, showing all the damage that can be done, just all the nastiness within the world, it really has an effect on the reader. And I think that it's one of the book's biggest strengths, the fact that it simply does not shy down in the face of anything like that. It is open and it is willing to go anywhere, and it does. But just because it's going to go anywhere doesn't mean that it's going to do so just for the sake of going to certain places. Everything that happens for a reason, or it happens with a certain emotional response to coincide with it. You're not getting gory for the sake of gory. You're getting gory for the sake of story. Okay? You like what I did there? Perfect. Okay, so themes. I'd say the big theme of this book boils down to duty versus desire. Yes, duty versus desire. Basically, internal motivation versus external motivation. You want examples? I'll give you an example right here. Sansa Stark, a character in the book, she's a teenage girl, and her family, she's one of the, she's in line to get married, basically, and her family, her father is friends with the king of the land of Westeros, which is the basic country or continent where this book takes place. And she has a big crush on Prince Joffrey, next in line for the throne, the Iron Throne, which his father Robert Baratheon sits on, the king of the nation. We see that through the story as it unwinds, though, that Joffrey really turns out to be a horrible person. But initially, Sansa has all these fantasies about marrying him, about him being this noble knight, this prince in shining armor that will save her, that will protect her, that will ultimately, she just the perfect ideal human being, essentially. This fantasy of hers, when in reality that comes crumbling down whenever she actually meets him. She sees that he's entitled. She sees that he's not at all good at defense. He's not a fighter, even though he has this incredibly cocky demeanor. He's gruesome, really. He's brutal. He has their wolf pup pets slaughtered, her wolf pet slaughtered, due to an aggression that it made against him whenever he tried to attack a friend of her sister's. And he also had that friend killed as well. So she sees that he's really not at all this perfect human being that she created in her mind. It's quite the opposite. And big spoiler alert, whenever he has her father beheaded, well, that's just the cherry on the sundae. Expectations versus reality definitely plays into this book quite a bit, as we see the harsh realities of life come into play. Jon Snow, another character of the story, the son of Robert Stark, who is Sansa's father, Sansa's brother. He basically goes to Winterfell, which is this place up in the north where they're sworn to protect a wall that holds out these invaders. And he imagines it very much so. He imagines himself being noble in this grand fight, enjoying being this independent person with their own, just rising up the ranks and becoming one of the greatest. When in reality, once he gets there, he realizes that he's made a huge mistake, because Winterfell is nothing like he imagined it. It's just this miserable, dull, just cold area that offers no comfort at all whatsoever. It offers no contact with his loved ones, and we see basically over the course of just a little bit of time, Jon's reality, and his perception of what he thought it would be, his expectations, just once again not live up to what he had imagined, and him having to face what that means to from now on, and acknowledging what he should do from there. Because going back to the internal versus external motivation thing, once his father becomes more involved in the throne business, he becomes the Hand of the King, because the Hand of the King dies. Once we see that, once he sees that war is waging, between different factions as they try to overcome the war, or as they try to take over the throne, because eventually in the book the king dies. We see him torn between his sworn duty to protect the wall, to stay at Winterfell, versus, to fight with his father and to fight with his brother and to fight for the Starks, in this battle for the Iron Throne. And that's where things get interesting, because we see once more that the political side of things that are happening, it's not just boiled down to war. We see casualties, we feel the pain, and most of all, we see the how torn up our characters are inside, how ripped between two different conflicting situations they can be. And this happens countless times in the book. Bran Stark, a young child, is pushed out of a window and paralyzed. He goes from being very much so just this happy-go-lucky child who is interested in climbing and exploring and adventures, and wants to be this hero like all of his brothers, who wants to fight the good fight, who wants to be a knight, who wants to be noble and gallant. And now he's confined to being carried around, to being physically carried by someone else, because he is paralyzed, not being able to explore or to be anything more than a cripple, essentially. Although that changes later in the story, that's a reality that he has to face. Going back to Robb Stark, or not Robb Stark, the father of Sansa Stark, Ned Stark. Ned Stark. We see that whenever he becomes the Hand of the King, he eventually learns the secret that Joffrey, the king's supposed son, is not his son at all. So he's torn between this decision to tell his friend that his son is not his son, that this is all a power play by his wife Cersei for the Lannisters, House Lannister, to take over the Iron Throne and to rule by with their own agenda, versus destroying this whole thing to him. Basically, he doesn't want to cause this political uproar. Like, he doesn't want to damage his friend's feelings or turn his friend against him, but at the same time he has this deep truth that really could change things, that really is incredibly important. We see the lengths that people will go to for power in this world, and we see that the politics are very muddy. Most of the people who are in control are not good people. In fact, all of the people in this book who are in control are not good people. They are incredibly corrupt individuals who are out to protect their own interest. Even Robert Baratheon, the king, while he's not as bad as the others, we see that he's a drunk. We see that he is constantly throwing celebrations, throwing his country into debt at the mercy of his own will, basically because he becomes so bored with the duties of the king that he does anything to avoid them, and that means, essentially making a fool out of himself and having weak leadership over the country to a point where it damages the whole. It damages everyone in a sense. Really, we see Littlefinger, a character called Littlefinger, who is a political advisor of sorts. He betrays Ned because Ned, he knows, he tries to entrust Littlefinger with the information that he knows, and eventually it gets him killed. Littlefinger betrays him, and that allows for his beheading later on in the book. So what we see is a very ugly world in Game of Thrones, but it's an ugly world that tells a story. It tells it tells tragedy. It tells everything that you could want. It just this incredibly, increasingly interesting political like web between these different factions who are fighting to rise up and become all powerful. We see evil. We see less evil, and we're kind of, we have to choose between one or the other, as if either is a good option when in reality they're both pretty bad. And on the off chance that we do get a pretty good character like Ned, they end up getting killed. So it's pretty murky territory right there, and it's pretty interesting to see how, you know, the lengths these characters will go to in order to protect themselves, and how they change between, how they're all conflicted between what they're supposed to do and what they want to do. It's very much a story of greed. Yeah. So that's Game of Thrones. Very good book. Definitely would recommend it. It's incredibly fascinating. I have barely even scratched the surface on all the different character motivations, all the different stories. Oh, and real quick, just as a side note, I'm surprised by how intricate this book is, but yet how easily it's able to tell its story, because you get like various different point of view accounts from the different characters. There's like 7 or something, I want to say. So, taking place all across the continent, all with the different stories. So it could easily be very confusing at times. And it's, you know, dealing with this grand scope, but somehow George R. R. Martin is able to tie it all together and connect the various pieces like a puzzle, and it comes together beautifully and wonderfully. And it's got enough depth to make you think, but it's also not, you know, extremely confusing or like a conundrum or anything to solve. It's manageable, and it's also branching and epic, you know. So yes, absolutely a fantastic book. It's filled to the brim with topics you could discuss and themes that I didn't even mention in this video review, but definitely incredible.